you're enjoying this content, hit that subscribe button. Join us. New from All Caps Comics, Cyberfrog, Unforgettable Tales on Indiegogo. 2 classic comics presented in color for the first time, plus a Blacklight Salamandroid poster. Back it today, links in the description below. Alright, hey, it's Comic Artist Pro Secrets, and I'm Ethan Van Sciver, 27-year veteran of the comic book industry, world's most charming, elegant, eloquent, and yet humble man. Great big Star Wars fan and trusted member of the media. This is what Dan DiDio looked like when I met him. Dan DiDio has left DC Comics on Friday. It's sending ripples of shockwaves, waves of, I don't know, either panic or joy throughout the comic book industry right now, depending on where you stand. I'm actually surprised. People are like, oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness Dan DiDio is gone. Don't let the door... let the door hit you on the way out. Rob Liefeld actually wanted Dan DiDio assaulted with his own door. I didn't know that was the feeling. This is an article bounding into comics here, and we'll go through it a little bit. And let me just clarify a few of the things that are in it and tell you what I suspect, and a little bit of insider knowledge here if I can. Dan DiDio is gone from DC Comics as of today. No reason has been given, but the co-publisher stepped down from his duties and parted ways with the company. So that sounds an awful lot to me, like suddenly fired. And it's interesting because, most of the time, especially like in cases like Diane Nelson or others, people are usually allowed to say, I'm retiring, okay? I'm taking a little vacation, and then I'm going to retire. And that's precisely what Diane did. She was the president of DC Entertainment, and she said, I'm taking a little break. She went away for a little while, and then in June she announced, I'm not coming back, I'm retired. Now that's usually what you let people do when you fire them from big corporations like this. For some reason, Dan wasn't allowed to do this or didn't want to do this. Dan DiDio was just suddenly, he's no longer with the company. That really does sound like a sudden and unexpected firing. Yeah, but rumors had been buzzing around that this was going to happen. Rich Johnson says that he was aware of it. Rich doesn't say that. Rob Liefeld said that he was aware of it, and when he asked other people at DC, they denied it. Like, they said, no, couldn't be. They were shocked by the allegations that Dan was going to go, and it turns out that Rob's information was pretty good. So this does sound like a thunderclap kind of firing. It sounds like it was done with some prejudice, and out the door. Comicbook.com reports DC confirmed his departure and will likely issue a statement soon. We'll probably get that on Monday. The site adds it's unclear if Jim Lee will handle publishing duties by himself from here on out, if a new co-publisher will be appointed. That'll be the question, and I wouldn't necessarily be surprised to see Jim Lee step down at some time in the near future, unless Jim Lee is just going to assume duties by himself. But I gotta tell you, I can't picture Jim Lee doing that. I feel like Jim Lee's position as co-publisher was honorary. I think that, the fact that they bought Jim Lee's company, he was such an important creative force. They didn't want him to ever go back to Marvel Comics ever again and draw the X-Men. I thought all of these things were reasons why Jim Lee, and he had managed his own successful company with Wildstorm over at Image, even though, if so, where are the Wildstorm characters? DC bought the Wildstorm universe and buried it. I mean, just utterly buried it. They tried to bring it out. They tried to bring the characters back. It just kind of never really worked because I guess they weren't really that, the characters themselves were never really that strong. But Jim Lee is either going to, in my opinion, my guess, he's either going to become the new publisher completely, or he'll probably step down when the new publisher is announced. And we can all take guesses about who the new publisher will be. Likely, it could be somebody like Bob Harris, who is already in-house. That's your boy Zach's guess. He believes it's going to be Bob Harris. I mean, I guess we'll see. All right, DiDio and Lee have worked together as co-publishers since 2010. Before then, DiDio was VP of editorial and then VP of executive editor for 6 years. Under their tenure, they oversaw the New 52, which, in my opinion, wasn't great. The New 52 started out, it sold really well, but I think that it was a kind of cold and unlikable relaunch for the most part. It hit Green Lantern. I remember Green Lantern basically just stayed the same. Green Lantern didn't change at all because Green Lantern was working. But for everything else, it was just, hey, brand new hideous costumes, and what do you know? Rebirth, which was great, but of course that was Jeff Johns' initiative, and that was something which Dan DiDio was not, in my opinion, from my my interactions with him, Dan wasn't thrilled that Rebirth was such a beloved success. 52, Infinite Crisis, Before Watchmen, and Doomsday Clock, which recently came to an end. So these are Jeff Johns as well. This is Jeff Johns. 52, I think that's the 52 week. That's the 52 week event, the weekly comic event. I mean, Dan did spearhead those events where he's like, hey, let's have weekly comics. This year, let's do a weekly comic book series, a maxi series that's 52 issues long. The idea of 52 was very much Dan Didio's idea as well. There are 52 universes out there. Pretty weird. They also toyed with the idea of yet another reshuffling of continuity. 5G. This is what did it right here. This is 5G was so important to the continued lifeblood of the company, to the continuation of DC Comics. Now, in case you don't know, AT&T came in and bought Warner Brothers, which already owns DC Comics. The two companies, AT&T and Warner Brothers, are in tremendous debt. Together, they merged in order to create a streaming service. Okay, so they have all of the. Think about Warner Brothers. Think about Time. Think about all of the properties that they own, all of the IPs that go along with that. We're talking like the Looney Tunes catalog and the superheroes. All of the Warner Brothers films. Think about it. It's an awful lot of stuff. So we've got all this stuff. We can absolutely stream it. We can stream all the old WB movies that go all the way back to the 1920s. And, maybe we can get ourselves out of debt. The future is in streaming. Is the future in comic books? No, of course it isn't. That is our past. Yeah, well, says Dan DiDio and DC Comics Publications. They say, wait a second. Yes, but we can create new stuff, new stories that you can. We are an IP factory. We're just going to continue pumping out new ideas for you to make into content. And they say, prove it, and then that's when DC Entertainment scrambles with something called 5G, which is going to basically say, hey, we're the fifth generation of our characters. And, of course, we're going to be woke, we're going to be diverse, we're going to be we're going to take all the same characters, and we're just going to kind of change their skin color and change their gender, and we'll see what happens from there. So this was their initiative that was meant to prove that they deserve to exist. And AT&T is kind of looking at them askew, I think, and whatever happened here, and a lot of scrambling was going on behind the scenes. People were walking away. Plans that were cemented were being scrapped and rethought through. This is them fighting for their lives. 5G is DC Comics fighting for their very existence, and at the end of the day, it was so disheveled, so messed up, evidently. The Dan DiDio has been shown the door. Now, there are some other advantages to Dan DiDio leaving. A big one that I'm going to kind of mention in a minute that it just hit me. It just occurred to me, and I got pretty excited about it. I'll tell you that one in a minute. Which establishes Wonder Woman as the first superhero. Okay, Diana makes contact with the world around World War II. No word dropped as of yet how DiDio leaving will affect this proposed relaunch. Maybe they'll scrap it altogether, or they'll just make it into, I don't know, like a limited kind of thing. Not their plans going forward, and that's what I hope, because it sounded awful. DC had their share of missteps as well under DiDio and Lee. Among them was the folding of Vertigo. Okay, so Vertigo, they did something called New Vertigo. We nicknamed it New Vertigo, in which they launched various horrible sounding woke comic books that were written and drawn by various, I don't know, sex criminals, various awful, horrible SJWs, one of whom was Zoe Quinn, who right in the middle of her project I don't know, she kind of tried to Me Too an ex-boyfriend who responded to it by committing suicide. So that was a problem. And then there was Eric Esquivel, who was doing a book called Border Town for New Vertigo, and it came out that he had sexually assaulted several young women that worked for him. And on it goes. Robbie Rodriguez was the artist of Zoe Quinn's book. He personally sent me a picture of his anus on Twitter as a means of protesting, as a way of protesting Comicsgate. These guys were all disgusting human beings, and of course none of their books sold. Oh, another big one. They did a book, Richard Pace and some other degenerate did a book about Jesus Christ being a failure and being sent back to Earth to learn how to be a good savior from a Superman-style superhero. And so many Christians were offended by this notion that they all said, I mean, this is astonishing, 250,000 signatures on a petition begging DC Comics to not publish that book. DC Comics hasn't had 250,000 readers of their books in decades, and here we go. They've got 250,000 people saying we will definitely protest one of your books, and of course they canceled that book. The whole thing was a disaster, and it ended up in folding. They ended up folding the Vertigo line entirely. That all happened, whether you want to blame Dan DiDio or not, that all happened under his jurisdiction, under his time, right under his nose. So that's embarrassing. And yeah, you've got the DC Black Label line, which showed Batman's penis, and that went to press. And people were not happy about that. Like, when I say people, I mean people at AT&T who are sitting there saying, hey, Batman, isn't that a kid's property? Aren't we marketing this to children? Why are we showing Batman's wiener? These are all good questions to ask. All right, so of the problematic rollout there, he promised improvements during a retailer Q&A. He says, the response and reaction has been better than we could have imagined. Our plan is to make sure we're consistent in the material we're putting out, and that it's strong and that it comes out on time. We will not be soliciting anything until we are clear that this material will come out as scheduled. We like the maturity, the sensibility, the quality. The talent is going to be driving this line, he added. We will not be overproduced here because we want to make sure this is a long-term plan. All right, so DiDio won't get to see any long-term plans come to fruition now. He joins a trend that started last year with laying off 240 comic book employees, a decision made by Warner Brothers. This is something else. The writing may be on the wall. Randall Stevenson, CEO of Warner Media, parent company AT&T, declared in October, and we covered this on this channel. We're going to cover this whole thing now. We're going to watch the results of what happened today or yesterday with Dan DiDio going, and I predict we're going to watch the end of DC Comics here as a publishing wing. Of course the characters are going to stay. You're going to have movies, but the comic books aren't going to be coming out, at least not through DC Entertainment anymore, and that's going to be interesting as well. All right, so he says we have no sacred cows among their assets to be reviewed over the next 3 years. No, despite the fact that DC Comics is 80 years old, it's not a sacred cow to people who are $160 billion in debt. He said this in a third quarter conference call with investors. He said, we're committed to an objective, diligent, and disciplined process. We'll analyze the merits of each of our business individually and as part of the whole. But let me be clear, we have no sacred cows. All right, we've monetized more than $30 billion in non-strategic assets over the last few years. DC wasn't mentioned, but the implications are dour. And this is interesting, too. This is another just kind of indication of DC Comics being pushed, marginalized. AT&T seems to forget the publisher even exists. DC had a reduced presence at Hall H and the San Diego Comic-Con. DC Comics usually has an enormous spot. And it's very expensive, but it's something that they've considered to be an important thing. They need to be at San Diego. They need to have a big presence there. They need to have a gigantic booth. And they're, it's like it's enormous. Their spot on San Diego. Not this time. This last year, they were just kind of shoved into the corner of the Warner Media booth. The small license look, as well as other Warner products showed up at a small licensing expo. It was tiny. It's reduced. They're not going to spend the money promoting comic books the way that they used to. It's just not going to happen. All right, so in Wonder Woman 1984's case, they opted to move the trailer's premiere and other announcements to December's Comic-Con experience in Brazil. That worked out okay, but so there was a small victory there. Last September, former DC Comics artist Ethan Van Sciver, that's me, predicted on a live stream, I kind of feel like AT&T is going to consider divesting DC Comics. That's what I think is going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to do so. That's a lot of debt. And yes, I stand by that, and I think I'm being vindicated as time goes on. Here on Comic Artist Pro Secrets, we may sound nutty sometimes, but we're usually right. We're usually right, or at least I am. I think there's only one of me here. I wish I had a big crew, a big staff, but it's just me. All right, the reason why he sees that happening is the hedge fund Elliott Management has a $3.2 billion stake in AT&T. Furthermore, they're not happy that AT&T stock is underperforming compared to the competition in the telecommunications industry and the S&P index. EVS discussed a letter Elliott, which is that hedge fund group, sent to AT&T specifying Elliott's letter also calls on AT&T to streamline its, quote, bureaucratic organization, remove redundant positions, and consider outsourcing non-core functions. Along with the office centralization and other cost-cutting, Elliott sees $10 billion in potential annual savings that could expand AT&T's profit margins. Oh boy, look at that. This is a great... Wow, I got to start making really good thumbnails like that again. That's incredible. All right, so here's the thing. His exit is a sign that he could not stem the tide. How does Didio stepping away hit you? Sound up below. Wow, everybody's talking about this. People are excited about it. Some people think it means the end of the comic book industry. Other people think that it means that, maybe now DC Comics can be saved. Here's how I feel about it. I don't think there's any way to staunch this bleeding. I just don't. I think that the decision's already been made, and it's just a matter of time now. AT&T is going to divest. DC Entertainment, and it would be interesting to see if maybe Disney wanted to pick up, if Marvel wanted to pick up these characters and become the big Marvel Comics owning Superman and Wonder Woman and Batman, and not owning them, but being able to publish them, licensing them, as comic books. That seems likely to me. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting about that is that Jeff Johns, in his at the end of his new comic book, at the end of his what was it called? Doomsday Clock. At the end of it, he predicted, look, there's something called Secret Crisis in 2030, and then he kind of obliquely referenced that Superman would have his life saved by the Incredible Hulk and Thor. Okay, so that's interesting. That kind of predicts that 10 years from now, DC and Marvel would have a crossover. Now, there will be no crossover with DC and Marvel, and this is why I'm saying that Dan DiDio leaving might kind of be a good thing. It might free up some opportunities. There could be no crossover between DC and Marvel as long as this man is here or Joe Quesada is over at Marvel. Now, Joe Quesada, the reason for that being, that Joe Quesada famously went to the New York Post and was talking about his new job as EIC of Marvel Comics, and made some references to DC Comics being akin to a porno star with an enormous package who was unable to achieve arousal, because DC Comics was never able to make Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman reach their full sales potential or creative potential. Now, the way Joe Quesada described that infuriated this man. He looks happy here, but picture him angry. I've seen it. And he said, we will never, ever, ever, ever work for Marvel Comics or work with Marvel Comics on anything as long as Joe Quesada is there. Joe Quesada has made no such pronouncement about Dan DiDio, that I know of. But here's what I will say. Dan DiDio not being there anymore means that is no longer it's no longer an issue, and maybe there could be a crossover between DC Comics characters and Marvel characters, and if there were, right now, this industry gravely needs something that fun and that exciting and that creative. That could be something that would put some money in the pockets of retailers. That's something that could get fans into the comic book stores again. And God willing, as the comic book industry goes under for the count, for the last time, These people put aside their differences and go ahead and create an enormous Marvel Comics versus DC Comics crossover that will make millions and millions and millions of dollars for both companies. I think that'd be a good idea. This guy stood in the way of that. So did Joe Quesada. Joe Quesada was demoted terribly, but he's still at Marvel Comics. Dan Didio's no longer there. I don't know. Read between the lines. Go ahead. Make this thing happen. These two companies need to actually work together at this point. There's no reason, and there's no profit in being bitter enemies. Thanks everybody for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. Make sure you're still subscribed to this channel. I really appreciate you. Thank you guys for all of the support. Make sure that you sign up for Cyberfrog, the Wrecked Planet, the sequel to Blood Honey. I've got an email list that I'm collecting, so if you'd like to be notified about when Cyberfrog 2 Wrecked Planet goes live, sign up for that email list immediately, please. And also back Cyberfrog Unforgettable Tales 2. The links to both of those are in the description. Love you guys, and see you again later with another video. Hello, potential Indiegogo backers. This is Ethan Van Sciver, and let me tell you about Cyberfrog 2 Wrecked Planet. In this follow-up to Blood Honey, Cyberfrog wakes up in the year 2018 to find the world has been devastated by vicious alien wasps called the Vespis. What remains of humanity has fled into the woods for survival. Disconnected from his brother Salamandroid and his mother's ship, Chel Sin, for Cyberfrog, fighting back will mean the worst loss of all. Now is your chance to sign up to be notified by email when this campaign launches in March. You'll receive an exclusive Vespis trading card with your backing when you do. No one else will get one, just you. And remember everyone, stay calm, stay in the trees, stay near the smoke, and always wear red. See you in March. Hey, you want to follow me on Twitter? Are you sure? Well, if so, I'm at Ethan Van Sciver. That's at Ethan Van Sciver. See you there. Hey, I got a P.O. box. Want to send me some mail? Send it to Ethan Van Sciver, P.O. Box 607, Marlton, New Jersey, 08053. And I'll probably open it up on the live stream. Thanks very much, everyone.